Okay, so this session is about customization versus configuration. So it's more of a discussion aspect and how you approach the customization piece of it. When I was teaching the Remedy Approved Consulting class, everybody remember the old RAT class? When I was teaching performance tuning and troubleshooting, the old PT and T class, when I was with BMC and Remedy, I focus, and I still focus, on documentation. You need to have documentation no matter what you're going to do for customization and configuration. Because if you're like me, the older you get, the more you forget. And if I was to leave right now in the middle of a customization, and I come back tomorrow, I don't want to spend an hour trying to figure out what I did yesterday to start on it from there, because I'm burning the customer's money in that capacity. Another thing is, as I'm doing all of this, whether it's configuration or customization, the customer tends to come up and bug me and say, what have you done today? All I have to do is show it to him. So he sees all that work. Now, I am anal in some cases because I will build an active link, put it in the documentation, and have to redo the active link because it didn't work, which is okay for me because that meets my style. I'm not asking you to do something like that. I'm just asking somewhere along the lines, do baby steps of documentation, whether it's a configuration or a customization in that capacity. So in this functionality, it's more along the lines of, yes, I am a consultant. I did get my certification as a Remedy Approved consultant. It did me no good because it got me no money, got me no job. It just, always got mine from word of mouth and career and stuff like that, and just working along that aspect. But again, having that certification basically just said I took the training class. Okay, and I did it because it was at back that day. If you ever took it, it was a hard class to take. So, in here, I do a lot of things on looking at configuration customizations. And when I go and do a job, I look and see what somebody's already done it before me. And for some reason, they do more customization than they do configuration. I went to Florida for an engagement, and the guy was old school, older than me, doing the old school stuff instead of overlays. And he broke the email notification process because he did a customization to an out-of-the-box workflow that broke because he didn't go into the guide and fix and do the setup there. He didn't do it as an overlay, so it broke the whole process. So I got called in to fix that issue, which he broke it and they couldn't get any notifications for 2 days. I come in, I figured out what it was. All I did was just remove what he did, put it in as an overlay, start it up, and they said, "What'd you do?" It's like, I did what you're supposed to do. Do it as an overlay. So you have to be aware of what you can and cannot do. I do a lot of customizations tied to smart IT. Anybody ever do any smart IT customizations? You can't, for the most part. You have to do it as filters. So you do a lot of back-end functionality to that aspect. So when you're looking at what you need to do and the customer's giving you what they're asking you to, the first thing you've got to think about it is, what is it doing now? And then you follow that up with, can I do it as a configuration item? Is there something in the system that allows me to configure the rule setting or the flow process or the change that they're providing? How many of you ever heard of the words data-driven? We drilled that in the training when you took a class from us, as far as you need to put it in as a data-driven form. Why? Because it's a lot easier to change the data than it is to change the workflow. I take it is there anybody in Helix here? BMC Helix? You know what, on BMC Helix, do you have rights to the production server as an administrator? Or do you have to send everything to BMC? Yeah. You have rights? Well, BMC will tell you, we'll give you rights to QA and dev, but we will not give you rights to production. When we came back, and my last 3 customers, I went back and told the sales rep, look, if you do not give us rights as the production environment, our customer is not going to be happy. And our customers wanting the changes today. They don't want to wait 2 weeks for you to finally get somebody to do it and put in the change. And I don't have time to write up what I have to put in. So they give me admin rights. Now I can't restart the server. I don't have the rights to the server or changes in that aspect, but I do have rights as a dev studio to make changes in the development environment. And being the smart consultant I think I am, I know how to get around those rebooting stuff to make sure that things are happening to test it out through that whole process. So in the configuration side, I got to look for where can I change this data within the system for the customer to be happy, to give the customer what they want. Here is an example. How many of you have dealt with incident management records of the status of resolved, but your customer does not want to give a reason why it was resolved? Have you ever had that? Don't you, when you resolve the ticket, you have to give a status reason? Don't you have to give a resolution? They're okay with the resolution. They're okay with the resolve. They're not okay with the status reasons because, number one, they don't like the reasons that BMC gives you. And number two, they don't want to change it. They want them to go away. So how do you do that? Well, it's very, very simple in Smart IT. You go to the configuration form that you find it and disable every one of them. Okay? Disable every one of them. And then go on the back end on the filter that requires you to have it and disable that filter. That's what you have to do. So it's a combination of configuration and customization. So you have to look at what the customer is asking. I have a customer that wants to change everything every time I turn around of something that they want to have. So in the configuration aspect, you're looking at the configurations that are associated to AR monitor, AR debug, AR error log. These are not configurations. These are things that are helping you to troubleshoot where things are happening. I have a hard time turning on logging in Smart IT for active links. I cannot find an active link in Smart IT unless I have progressive web apps. Okay? So I have to read through all of the active links to find out if it's a customization thing. I try to look for configuration items as much as possible. Can I configure the data in that process? Look at the foundation data. Can you change it through the foundation perspective in that capacity? When I look at a change management process, I like to notify the entire technical cab of a request from change before they go to the cab meeting. I promote that. If I come out and do change management for you, I'm going to push that because I would rather the cab members know what's coming to them before they come to the meeting, so that meeting doesn't last that long. They don't have a lot of time. So they can tell me what they think about this change request before they get into the cab. But we don't take the cab or do the change until we've actually gone to the cab and asked, did you have any problems with this? I see you didn't have a problem, or you must have a problem because you didn't respond to it. Well, you can say, well, I have no problem with it. Well, then approve it. So once he approves it, then I can go ahead and approve it and have it launch. So he's aware of it. He sees it there and they can approve it. Well, how can I do that to send them the notification as a group and make that happen? Configuration data, create a notification group. Put them in that notification group. Make them a associate member. Do not let them be assigned or for availability. So they're not in there. And I also label the organization as non-support, which tells my technicians on the incident side, don't assign an incident ticket to this group because I can't hide. So you look at configuration data in that aspect. Look at the last one. How many have ever gone to status transition rules? Okay. How many of you have gone to the Smart IT configuration screen and changed things there? Again, is that really configuration or is that customization when you go into the configuration screen of Smart IT and hiding the field? Is it configuration or is it customization? Aren't you changing the architecture? Aren't you hiding it? Wouldn't you have to do an active link, change field, hide the field? That's customization. But this is configuration because they're giving you the tool of a configuration aspect. So it's really how you define it in that capacity. Here's a question for you. Change management. If I reject a change, I want you to be able to update it and resubmit it. What status do you put the change in? When you reject it, do you send the change request to rejected status or do you send it somewhere else? Does anybody know? Why not send it back to draft? What I look at in change management is, if I disagree with what you put in here, I'm the cab. I'm going to put it back on you to fix what I don't like, or have you decide to cancel it. It's your change. So why should I make that decision for you? Is because I'm going to tell you, if you want this change to happen, I need to see this document, this step-by-step process, and this to be done. If you're not going to do those three, it's not going to get passed. I'm not going to approve it. So I'm going to send it back to draft, and you get it, and you basically have to come in. Well, guess what? There's no notification in draft. How does the coordinator know you sent the ticket back to draft? There is a configuration setting under change management for notifications to send it to them when it goes to draft to notify the coordinator. So all I have to do is do a configuration setting in that capacity. All I have to do is go to the configuration process and change it from rejected to draft when it's rejected. And it's set that way. So those are the things you got to think about when you're looking at process. It's all configuration data. So here is something that you could look at in 20.08 is the statistics on Smart IT. When you go to 20.08, the statistics, you used to get the statistics, now it's a button. Did you notice that? How many of you on 20.08? Anybody? Did you notice the metrics is gone like that with the button? It's a configuration item. All you have to do is come here to the configuration setting where it says the explicit stats refresh, change it to false. Now you get your stats back. To me, I'd like to have that set. Well, BMC said that they hid it because it was a performance issue. Okay, well, all right. But again, my customer didn't like that, so I had to change it. The sys status transition rule is defining what you can do going from point A to point B, or from point B back to point A. It's telling you what you're allowed to do. Can you go in your incident form from pending to resolved? Yes or no? In sys transition, I don't know, I can't say it. Sys status transition rule form does not allow you to go from pending to resolved. My customer wants that to happen. So I had to go into here to allow that transition to happen. But what I told him was, what does it screw up? Why should you not go to resolve from pending? You're screwing up your service level agreements. Because when you're in pending, you go back to assign, guess what gets started? The clock gets started again. If I go from pending to resolve, that clock never gets restarted. So now you're screwing up your service targets on the time period. So that's why you're supposed to go, well, I took 5 minutes to go back to assign or back to the in progress and then switch it over to resolve. They didn't want that extra step. So I had to change it here. So again, it's a configuration setting, but I'm going to explain to the customer the ramifications. And the ramifications are your SLS. Okay, here's the sys status reason menu item. Okay, in this case, this is where you have to add in any new status reasons or disable ones, and the ones I had to do. But the kicker is it's a combination of configuration and customization, because you have to also modify the form to include the set. So it's not just all a bed of roses. Anybody ever remember the phrase from Doug Mueller, who's the godfather of Remedy, that built the Remedy product, the AIR system server? When a customer came up to him and said, well, if I asked you to customize something for me, would you do it? And he said, no. He asked him again, asked Doug Mueller, would you do it? Would you customize it? He goes, no. Asked him a third time, would you customize it? He said, no, but I'll think about it, which was translated to us as don't customize. So he explained it to him. He's just messed around with the customer, telling him that you can customize, and he wants you to customize, but he wants you to make sure you know what you're doing when you're making the change. So in customization, you're altering the architecture. You're altering the process of the tool. So in any environment, you should either alter the process, alter the tool, or alter both. And the recommendation is alter both. Try to fit your processes into the tool. If you can't fit your process, then change the tool. Don't just change the tool to fit your processes in there, because your process may not be correct in that capacity. So these are some of the things about the customization process, the definitions that BMC provides on it. They came out, remember the headaches of overlays back in 7.6.4 and versus moving to 8.0? Those old timers like myself, they didn't work. Okay. Everybody's doing all these overlays, and then all of a sudden you do an upgrade, and where's all my customizations? They're gone. Well, now they got it fixed, and you do the overlays. That means you have to go into the best practice view to do the overlays. Okay. Does anybody ever go to the basement? Yeah. I strongly recommend you use the base mode to import workflow that you built, because it will strip off your permissions if you come to the best practice. If you use explicit groups on your workflow. Does everybody know what explicit groups versus illicit? Explicit groups is explicitly implied, the groups that you put on there. It's your custom groups. Where the implicit is the implied ones like public or submitter or assignee. So if you were to import that through the best practice, it'll strip out your explicit groups if you haven't. If you put public, then go through the best practice. Just be aware of it. Also, it doesn't, I don't think it puts it in as a base. It puts it as a custom, and you don't see the form in the back inside at all. So then you'd have to go and right click and make it a base structure. So now it's on the back inside too. And I've had issues with that where it's a custom, but it's not the back end. But the biggest one I have is that permission strip off. So just be aware of that. I do recommend you go through best practice. Just when you import something that has explicit groups, switch it to base mode, import it in, then switch back to best practice. Any questions there? Do you convert that to custom then? If I import it in, I would change it to the structure, the base structure if I wanted to, but you don't have to change the custom. You can leave it as base. Well, you can't. It's not going to, BMC's not going to touch it. Well, that's true. Because your naming convention. And I've argued with BMC support on this many times before overlays came out, that if I change the name of a workflow item, their upgrade is not going to touch it. It would stay there. If I don't follow the naming convention that they follow, my workflow will stay there. That's old school. Now in overlays, what are you doing? You're putting an overlay with what? I don't know if they got this from me or not, but I told them when I was teaching the class on how to do it before overlays, I would put at the end _ C or O or X. X meant new. Well, what do they do with overlays? _ C. So I don't know if they were getting that from the training I was teaching all these developers and so forth, because I got wind from the support saying I shouldn't be teaching that because the tick bang was getting screwed up, because they were putting tick bang and then _ X for a brand new one, and it wasn't working. And Dev Studio is nice enough to still do that for you. Yeah. Oh yeah. So you have to be aware that everybody knows the tick bang, right? Which is basically to fire phase 3, phase 2 actions in phase 1. Like fire notification now, don't wait. Does everybody understand the phases? Yes, no? Yes, no? Everybody understand the phases? Does everybody know what phase fires, what actions fire in phase 3? There are 3 actions. There are 3 actions in phase 3 and 2 actions in phase 2. Phase 2 is push, indirect SQL. Phase 3 is your notification. I don't know if anybody does DSO anymore, and run process. Well, I'm going on a contract that's doing DSO as well. But those are the phases. And what happens is the old school verbiage is Halloween, trick or treating. 1, 2, 3-year-old kids come up. They come up to grandma's house, knock on the door, trick or treat. Can we have something good to eat? Grandma gives them the best cookies ever. Take off. That's phase 1. So that's your set fields, your change fields. I'm sorry, there is no change fields. Your set fields, your messages, things like that in phase 1. When a 10-year-old kid comes up and they like to do stuff to grandma's yard during the year, she doesn't like them that much, but she likes their costume. So she will give them the not so good cookies, but she will say, well, wait a minute. Why don't you wait over here? I see another 1 or 2 or 3-year-old coming up. I see another phase 1. This 9 or 10-year-old is a phase 2. That's a push field or a direct sequence. No data is taken with that kid. No cookie is taken with that kid. That kid comes over here and waits until all of these set field actions, all these phase 1 actions come through and do what they need to do. By the time they're done, the kid can come out and get the cookie. That cookie may change from a great cookie to a burnt cookie. Because you could do a set field, hey, set this and give this to Matt. But then another set field action in filter says, well, if it's this situation, give it to Kim. But I'm going to do a push field action to update the profile to say who has the ticket. Okay. So if I leave the push field in that case, I will do fine. I will update Kim's because she's been tied to that record. But what if I do the tick bay? I'm going to fire the push field to update Matt's record that he's been assigned the ticket. And then I'm going to push it again to Kim's and say she's been updated to the ticket. So now they both are working on the same ticket, supposedly, but Matt's no longer assigned to it. That doesn't happen. That's where that phase 2 comes in with that tick thing. I'm going to send the send the update to his record saying he's got 500 open tickets. Kim's got 500 open tickets when really Matt has 0 open tickets. So we say how that can be a cause with that phase 2 process. So you have to be aware of that. And so that's where the overlays come into play. Make sure that you don't make those mistakes in that aspect. And an overlay is kind of like the old encyclopedia. You remember how many of you read the encyclopedia book? Not the internet, encyclopedia book in school. And you looked at the heart. The heart was one of the things we had to learn. And they give you the regular white page of a shell of a heart. Then they have this clear plexiglass comes on top and shows you the valve. And then it has another one that comes in and adds onto it. That's an overlay. An overlay is I'm giving you the base structure. You're coming in and putting something on top of it. That's your customization. BMC is not going to touch your customization. Okay. That's where that __C comes into play. So how do you add a custom field to Smart IT? Because you are going to have to change the architecture. You have to come to these 4 forms and add that new field into the process before Smart IT will even pick it up. Anybody ever add fields to Smart IT? So this is basically where you come into it. But again, if you implement progressive web, you no longer have to do that capability. Okay, you just add it to the HPD help desk form. That's it. Of course, you'd have to do it to the interface if you're going to do any integrating of that data, but that's what you have to do. So when you come in with an overlay, you use the best practice. We already talked about that. Then you open up the form that hasn't been overlaid and you right click and say create overlay. How many of you for the very first time wanted to remove your overlay and were too scared to do it?
Yeah, I told Chuck that was a bad idea.
Yeah, it's like if you create an overlay, you better make sure you highlight the overlaid object and right click and delete. Because if you highlight one that's not overlaid and right click and delete, you're deleting the form. Okay, so that was scary for me. Yeah. If you go into best practice and you right click and out of the box up. What's that? Well, again, I'm going back into the aspect of, yes, in base mode, you can't delete it because it won't do it unless it's an overlay you can delete. But if you're in best practice and you are in in base mode, you can do it.
No, base you can, not best practice. Oh, no, I see it right here. Delete straight out.
Okay. And in best practice.
Best practice, yeah.
For a non-overlay item.
Correct.
Okay.
So yeah, delete in best practice means delete your overlay.
Right.
But I wish that was.
I want you to spell that out.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, if it says base structure, right click, you can still delete it in the best practice. If it's your custom form, you should be able to. No, it's a custom field. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that's one of the changes. But when it first came out, I was too scared to even hit delete. So, because I was afraid that it would delete the whole thing, especially when you're trying to delete the help desk form and you already made it an overlay. It's like, well, I screwed up. And it's like you want to delete it. I mean, active link I can recover, but when you deal with forms, that's a little more scarier because you delete all the workflow tied to it. So, just wanted to point that out as far as the create. But when you create the overlay, then it's going to ask you what is the name of the form now. And so you put it in. What do you put in there? I always put the same name of the form of the form itself, and then it puts the underscore after. When you create an overlay of an active link, a filter, or a form, what do you put in that overlay name? Naming convention.
Yeah, it keeps the same name. It gives you some kind of modification.
But it gives you a pop-up that asks you what's the name of your object that you want to give it. So you can give it something different if you wanted to. Oh, it does. It did.
Like a track.
So right click on it. I don't have my Dev Studio. I'd have to go to BM, but so just right click on a non-overlay one, and does it give you a pop-up?
No, I think I know the pop-up you're talking about, but that isn't for naming it.
Well, that's what I always get on mine, and I'm on 20 dot, or what is it, 9.1.4? What's that? No, I get a, when I right click and do overlay, it asks me what do you want for the overlay name on my Dev Studios. Oh, I get it all the time. So, yeah.
I want to see what it looks like.
Well, it is on Helix, and it goes through the gateway server, but which really shouldn't matter. But it does give me, when I right click on any object, it'll say what do you want to call it, and I type in the exact same name. Sometimes I don't put in the colon because I'm so used to HTML not accepting it. So I'll put an underscore in its place, and it accepts it. Or I could probably leave it as blank, and it'll build it for me. But I always get that, and I always put something in.
Yeah, I just overlaid a format and filter. There's no pop-up.
All right, I'll give you a screenshot when I get it. Probably. I don't know why, but I could probably click on it, but probably don't see that little thing that says "Don't show this message again." Probably don't even see that. It doesn't show up. I mean, but that's what happens on mine when I actually do those. But this is your overlay functionality structure. And in this case right here, what we did was we added the cell phone process to the form itself. In this case was on the incident management form. So we just basically copied it over and wanted to display it on the Smart IT. So we already had it on the form. And we just went ahead and added it to those forms. And then we, of course, we refreshed it and did all the screen configuration changes. Okay, so some of the best practice steps and things like that to consider is make sure that the change that you're making, whether it's configuration or customization, is a valid reason. It's a purpose behind it. Always question. As a developer, as a consultant, never go with what the customer is wanting. Always ask them, why do they want it? What's the whole functionality? Because it may be something else they want, but they don't realize what they can get from the remedy system. So I always ask, what is your intent? What are you trying to get in that aspect? So I'm looking for the purpose in that aspect. Ensure no configuration features are available to replace for the customization. And again, there was some people that actually customized the whole thing and they didn't realize in the rule setting, there was a simple yes box or no box that they could have done. They just did a lot of customization behind the scenes. If the customization is to take place, consider using a risk level chart to the customer. I had one customer wanting to change the status levels recently. They wanted the status levels to do based on a template, and you're in change management. That's a risk level to me of a 10. Do not change the status because it's so ingrained with other forms and a lot of workflow that let's put a field on top of it. The problem with Smart IT is I cannot put that field on top of the status field like you can on a progressive web app form. But you can hide the status and still use the custom status field and use workflow that when they set it to 1, it updates the backend status. So I had to do that. So you have to look at, they're adamant about having the status. They don't want the status of the out of the box. How do you approach that type of thing? Okay. So that's where you have to have, and I have a chart. I'm going to show you that chart functionality. If your customization has to take place, I always try to look at it as, can I do it as data driven? Build the form and let them make the change in that process. And I'll show you some of those that I have here. Also do a checklist. I have a checklist that I run through every time that I do a customization to make sure that it's done. Did I put it in dev? Did I test it? Did I verify it? Did I put it in QA, did they test it and verify? And then I move it to prod, and then they test it and did a verify. So when I have to make a configuration or customization change, we follow that process. Utilize the overlays if at all possible, if it's an out of the box. But personally, I try to stay out of the box and try to do a customization piece that links to it in some form. Unless I can't do it, then I'll do the out of the box. And then the last one, of course, is documentation. So in this case here, these are just reasons why you need valid purposes, is what they're looking for, why they're trying to do it. Ensure that there are no configuration options that are available. Evaluate the system, look at the log files, see if there's something out there that you can make a change to a data record. Never give the customer a single option. That's the third bullet from the bottom. Never give them a third option, always, or one option. Give them multiple options. Let them make the decision. Okay? Because then they're making the decision about how the processes are run. As a consultant, I don't make their decision for them. This is the chart that I put together that I follow when they want to make a change. For example, the bottom one, they wanted to make a status change. I tell them it's going to take me 2 weeks to build, which it doesn't anymore, but it's going to take me 2 weeks, which I'm trying to tell them, don't do it. So that level 10 is trying to convince them to live with the tool. Where the first one and the second one is, I can alter the tool to meet your needs because it doesn't take that long. Here's my checklist. As I said, we run through the record. We go through dev, we go through prod, or QA, go through production. The documentation, you can run however documentation you want to, but this is what I do on my documentation. I basically put a ticket in incident because we don't use change, or I'd have it in change. So I put it in incident. I put in what the customer wants, and I put in the solution that I resolve his situation, to include if I convinced him not to do it. I keep a running record of my own functionality. And I also give them step-by-step of what I did, the workflow that's tied to it and everything else. So when I actually lead the project and somebody comes stepping in, they have the documentation. They're not going to go searching for these tickets. Okay. So this is just the format that I do. If the related required ticket is maybe something tied to another incident ticket that triggered the workflow and they want something else done, I'll put in the relationship, or if it was triggered from some other outside source. Here's a documentation. Did you know this in 2008? BMC puts a block on your attachments for doing HTML attachments. And how many of you have modified the email template configuration? I couldn't do it. This is how I found out. I took off the email attachment file, did the change, put it back on, it wouldn't let me save it. And I came over here to the attachment, and it includes that you cannot, you are not allowed to do HTML or HTML extension. But this is what I'm saying is it wasn't there before 2008. It wasn't included. And you don't find that out until after they make changes. So this is one of the changes they put in. So what's that? That's fine. But yeah, you're right. You could change it here. But again, if you're in SaaS and they don't give you the access as an administrator, they're not going to want you to change it. You have to put in a ticket to have them change it. If you're on-prem, it's easy. But in this case, I had to ask them, why did they put this in? And they said, we're doing it for protection. I said, well, you know, you're blocking us from the email template. I couldn't do the email template. So yes, I knew I could change it, but it's on production. They wouldn't let me do it. I changed it on dev and QA, and I had to ask them, is it okay for me to do it? Before they finally gave me full permission to do whatever I needed to do. But I just brought this out as a point that you could not make a change to your email template forms without having that. And that was just a change time. Couple of customizations. The email address is changed. The customer uses them for the Remedy login ID, which we told them not to, but they did anyway. But if somebody has a name change or if the domain changes, then it conflicts with a lot of other records that we run into in that aspect. So this is just showing you what I had to do to deal with the old addresses versus the new address. And again, it's the solution that we came up with in converting their login IDs from one address to another. Okay. Same thing as if they disabled the person's profile, how we handled the workflow to process that person by eliminating them from the CPMP, putting it in as obsolete. And then on the remedy login IDs, the problem that we had was that this workflow functionality of using the data wizard did not change the notes, the status history, or the assigned group fields as well. So there are some areas where that functionality doesn't work. So I had to go in and make those changes manually. Okay, so the data wizard does get rid of most of it or changes most of it. It doesn't change everything. And we also ran into another problem because of the DWP functionality. They lost all access to all their records. So we had to get BMC to do something on their synchronization to redo it on their side. We couldn't do it on ours. They had something to do with that. Okay. Here's another one with the RBE message. My customer wanted to know, is there a shortcut if we get these errors, how I can fix the RBE directly without having to resubmit the email? Because that's all they were doing, is resubmitting the email and putting it in. So went ahead and gave him the steps, provided the checklist for him, and put in the information that he had to do on what he had to change and modify and so forth. And these are the steps that you would change if it's rejected, and the steps if it was actually no rule found. And just relaunching it under the the Z1D action field, just resetting it to evaluate, save it, and we wouldn't have to resubmit the email. We would just go ahead and make the change. And would create the ticket for us. And again, another one is on the email activity log. They wanted updates. Again, my customer wants a lot of changes, and this is how my documentation goes in. And so I give them the fields that we had to add to the email notification file, the HPD work log file, all the workflow tied to it. And like I said, I'm anal about the workflow. I'm education. I'm training him on how to do all this because he never gets into Dev Studio. But if he ever wanted to, he could easily do step-by-step on how to create this. So that's where you can do small customization documentation or large customization. Okay. Any questions in customizations versus configuration versus documentation? And I'm going to go into my VM and I'm going to go and bring in my Dev Studio. Well, let's see if it doesn't kill my connection, but we'll see.
When overlays first came out, I had a BMCer try to tell me that using overlays was configuration and not customization. I called BS. I said, I've got to go into Dev Studio and I'm changing workflow. That is customization.
That is true.
Yeah.
I've heard that too from some of the support people from BMC. Yeah, let's go. Oh, I can't do it on this. I have to do it on that one. I don't care.
Just trying to keep you out of trouble, man.
Hey, I'm always in trouble.
Okay.
And watch it not do it as it should here. So yes. Green. I will do that. I don't want you to see my mask.
I still see it on Zoom.
Or you are. No, that's fine. I mean, there's so many different passwords and stuff. I know I'm not supposed to do this, but I have to, so I can remember it. Now, this environment, I'll go into my QA since it is not PWA for an incident and stuff.
and I'll find something that has not been overlaid. So what I'm doing is tapping into our gateway server. Because with SaaS right now, you have to have Developer Studio on the gateway server to access this environment on the BMC side. That's gonna make a liar of me, but better. QA.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go with and let's go with that.
That's that's version control data. That's not name.
Oh,
That's just like
well,
tracking.
so they must have version control put on. That's what it is.
Yes,
Right.
but you're not
Right.
changing you're not creating the name for the overlay.
Right. Okay. Well, I always thought I was, but then it didn't dawn on me. I don't have the control of the overlay or the version control.
Now that is extremely useful if you are doing version control. That you put in the same label for everything you're going to put in a specific point. Then you can use that label as part of your depth.
But do you have yours turned on then? I take it.
We do.
I mean, but how many developers do you have? Just five. But see, it's only me. So
Yeah. But we also have.
Yeah, but you're like
I'm like five. I think I'm like five. I may not be.
Well, we also keep that turned on to keep the object modification ball turned on.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I stand corrected. It's my version control, not the overlay functionality. But I stay in as much as I can in best practice. But I'm still old school. If I build it myself, why do I need to do it as best practice? Go in the base mode and put it there. Because I really don't like to create overlays on my own custom data. Because I happen, because occasionally I get that if I import it in, then it wants me to create an overlay.
if it's a custom object, you can't
You can't create an overlay. That's right.
Let's see. And it's grayed out on custom.
It's been a long time. I think I've seen the permissions thing you're talking about. And I haven't done it in a while, but I just report to death again and it brings them in. It's like a timing thing.
Well, what we've seen is if you're doing something like a big group like this, and you have, say, a custom form, and that custom form is not in the application.
Yes.
Then anything that's role-based, it will strip completely out.
Yes.
So you do have to make sure that it's in the application prior to importing the workflow, or it will go away.
Right.
So if you do it in the whole dep file with everything at once, yeah, you're gonna lose everything. Re-import that same dep file again, convert back in.
I mean, I've had several people do it, import it that way, and they said they stripped it off and they had to re-add in the permissions on every one of them. I said, why don't you just delete it, go to base mode, and then re-put it in, your groups are there. Because it worked that way. But
Yeah, most of the time it's because the objects are in an application.
Yeah.
And it's strict on that because
Right.
of that. Right, because then it says, okay, hey, this is not an deployable application.
right,
So let me take all that out.
right.
Right, but usually what happens is it's a timing issue with that first dep file input. Because it won't do the application until after it does the workflow on that input. You're doing it all at once. So a lot of times if you do that and import the form first,
Right.
then import the workflow in a separate dev file or just add them in the second import, then that's not an issue.
But is that documented anywhere?
So when you're importing before, it's not gonna be an application though, right?
Well, I mean, if it's not a box, yeah.
Oh, gosh.
But no, you also have to import the application, but in the order of the things that it hits when it's importing the dev file, the application is one of the last things it does.
Yeah, so that's what I usually do. If I'm adding a form to an existing application, I'll
Right.
import the form, add it to the app, import the form again.
Yes.
Get my permissions back. And do the one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just to show you what I do on the documentation, I have a, excuse me, a test document, which basically anything I'm working currently on, I have an incident ticket registered, and whatever I'm doing, I start building the workflow, research, or whatever. And then whenever it's actually moved into production, then I move it to my final build. And the build has a list of come on. Once again. Come on, load up. Here we go. These are all the customizations we've done for this, or configuration changes we've done for this custom.
I have a remedy form for that.
Well, I did too, but I couldn't take it with me everywhere I went. So then these are all the changes directly, and then I can go straight to it if I needed to. As far as what's in the system. And then they can, all of a sudden, then they can start going in and seeing everything I've done. And I've had questions come back from them to say, how did you do this? Why did you do that? Or can you fix this? So then I come back to here and look and see what I did.
Yeah.
Because it could have been 6 months ago and I don't remember everything.
And then tying into the incident or the change, you also know what the context was. So if it's a change, they go, why would you have done this? You go back to that change. Because this person asked me to and it got approved.
Right. So does anybody else use other reporting or documentation tools? Or do you do a snapshot that you have in Dev Studio that you could do? Or what is it, the analyzer I think they have now that you could run and analyze and pull up your workflow?
I've done it years.
We have a Word documentation.
You have a what?
We create the change ticket for all documents.
But you keep everything in the change ticket. You don't put it in a Word document or.
That's I think so. And then we added some custom fields in there. You have like risk level. We have like shirt sizes, extra small,
Yeah.
large. You know, those relate if it's a 5-minute change, 1 hour change, and so forth.
Okay.
If it's an extra small, it's more of a kind of a configuration change. If it's a small, anything above a small, it could be quick customization, maybe a filter change.
Right.
So if it's more involved with form change, we get used involved. We run it through kind of a 2-week build cycle. So we get small changes into production as soon as we can. Larger stuff, the extra larger splitter, those may take 4 to 6 weeks.
Right.
We don't have a whole bunch of those.
Well,
That's how we start.
if this customer would use change management, I would not even do my documentation. I'd just put it in there and he can research and everything else. But he only uses incident, one SRM. I've built several service catalogs. They don't want to do DWP, even though they have it, the basic. It wants to do the service catalog. I've built 10 service catalogs to show where they can separate it based on the types of services that they're offering. And we put that on a hold, and it's been on hold for almost a year.
And if we have a larger project, which we'll create actually a release and then just map those, relate those different changes to it. Keep that release open until it changes.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for your time. And thanks for proving me wrong.